The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace sparkled with 1,000 chandeliers as the evening celebration began. It was the first major state dinner since Catherine had officially been crowned as the new Queen of England. The air buzzed with excitement and nervous energy as members of the royal family, government officials, and foreign dignitaries gathered for this historic occasion. Everyone knew tonight would be different from any event that had come before. Catherine stood at the entrance of the ballroom, her emerald gown shimmering under the soft golden light. She wore the crown with grace and dignity, her posture perfect as she greeted each guest with a warm smile. Years of preparation had led to this moment. She had studied protocol, learned from the best advisors, and earned the respect of the people through her charitable work and dedication to the nation. Tonight was her moment to shine as the rightful queen. As the ceremony continued, guests began taking their positions in the receiving line. One by one, they approached Queen Catherine, bowing or curtsying as tradition demanded. The Duke of Cambridge bowed deeply, his wife following with an elegant curtsy. Foreign ambassadors paid their respects with formal nods. Even the Prime Minister showed his deference to the new monarch. Everyone understood the importance of this ritual, the ancient tradition that acknowledged the sovereign's authority. Then came Camilla. She walked toward the Queen with her head held high, her expression unreadable. Those standing nearby felt the tension immediately. Something was different about her approach. While others had shown proper respect through their gestures, Camilla simply walked past the receiving line as if she were attending an ordinary dinner party. She made no move to curtsy. She offered no bow. She barely acknowledged Catherine's presence as the newly crowned queen. The room fell silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Glasses of champagne paused halfway to lips. Every eye turned to watch this unprecedented moment unfold. The orchestra, sensing the shift in atmosphere, let their music fade into an uncomfortable quiet. Even the servants standing along the walls froze in place, unsure of what they were witnessing. Never in the history of the monarchy had such a breach of protocol occurred at such a public event. Catherine remained composed, though those who knew her well could see the slight tightening around her eyes. She had expected challenges in her new role, but not this. Not such a public display of disrespect from someone who had once been so close to the royal family. The Queen took a measured breath, her training kicking in as she maintained her dignified expression. She would not let this moment break her composure, no matter how shocking it felt. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd like waves spreading across a still pond. Distinguished guests exchanged glances of disbelief. Foreign diplomats looked confused, uncertain whether they had just witnessed a cultural misunderstanding or a deliberate insult. Members of Parliament shifted uncomfortably, knowing they were watching history being made in the worst possible way. This story would be in every newspaper by morning, discussed in every household across the nation. Lady Margaret, one of the Queen's senior advisors, stepped forward from her position near the throne. Her face was pale but determined. She had served the royal family for 30 years and had never seen such a flagrant violation of protocol. With quick, purposeful steps, she approached the Queen and whispered urgently in her ear. The situation required immediate action. Allowing such disrespect to go unaddressed would set a dangerous precedent and undermine the Queen's authority from the very start of her reign. Catherine gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She understood what needed to be done, even though it pained her to do it. This was not about personal feelings or old friendships. This was about the institution of the monarchy, about respect for the crown, and about maintaining the dignity of her position. If she appeared weak now, if she let this insult pass without consequence, she would spend the rest of her reign fighting to establish her authority. 2 royal guards, standing at attention near the palace entrance, received a subtle signal from Lady Margaret. They were men of duty and honor, trained to protect the monarchy and uphold its traditions. Captain James Harrison and Lieutenant Robert Thompson had served the royal family for over a decade. They knew every protocol, every rule, every expectation. What they were being asked to do was unprecedented, but their orders were clear. They moved with military precision toward where Camilla now stood, seemingly oblivious to the storm she had created. The guards approached with measured steps, their red uniforms immaculate, their expressions neutral and professional. Captain Harrison spoke first, his voice low but firm enough to carry in the now silent ballroom. He addressed Camilla with the respect that his position demanded, but his words left no room for misunderstanding. The situation had gone beyond what could be overlooked. Protocol had been broken and there would be consequences. The guards were there to ensure that those consequences were carried out immediately and decisively. Camilla turned to face the guards, and for the first time that evening, her confident expression wavered. She seemed to realize, perhaps too late, the magnitude of what she had done. This was not a private disagreement that could be settled behind closed doors. This was a public challenge to the Queen's authority, witnessed by hundreds of people who would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. The implications of her actions were now becoming terrifyingly clear as the two guards stood before her awaiting her response. The ballroom remained frozen in this tableau of tension and disbelief. Queen Catherine stood at her position, regal and composed despite the chaos surrounding her. The guests watched in stunned silence, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would be recorded in history books. And Camilla, who had entered the evening with such confidence, now faced the consequences of her decision to deny the new queen the respect that tradition and protocol demanded. Whatever happened next would change everything. Captain Harrison's voice cut through the tense silence like a knife. His words were measured and professional, but everyone in the ballroom could hear the weight behind them. He explained to Camilla that her refusal to show proper respect to Queen Catherine had violated centuries of royal protocol. This was not a minor oversight that could be ignored. This was a direct challenge to the monarchy itself, and it could not be allowed to stand. The captain gave Camilla one chance to correct her mistake and show the proper curtsy to Her Majesty. Camilla's face flushed red with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Her hands clenched at her sides as she looked from the guards to Queen Catherine and back again. The entire ballroom waited in breathless anticipation for her response. Would she swallow her pride and perform the curtsy that protocol demanded, or would she continue to refuse, forcing the situation to escalate even further? The seconds stretched into what felt like hours as everyone watched this dramatic confrontation unfold. With a defiant lift of her chin, Camilla made her decision. Her voice was cold and sharp as she declared that she would not bow to anyone. She stood her ground, her eyes blazing with determination. In that moment, she seemed to believe that her position, her history with the royal family, and her years of service gave her the right to ignore tradition. She was wrong. The moment those words left her lips, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted from tense to explosive. There was no going back now. Queen Catherine's expression remained calm, but those who knew her could see the steel in her eyes. She had given Camilla every opportunity to do the right thing. She had shown patience and restraint even in the face of such public disrespect. But there were limits to what any monarch could tolerate, and Camilla had just crossed them all. The Queen gave a slight nod to Captain Harrison. It was a simple gesture, but its meaning was crystal clear. The guards were to proceed with their duty. Lieutenant Thompson moved to stand beside his captain, and together they positioned themselves on either side of Camilla. Their movements were practiced and efficient, the result of years of training. They were not rough or aggressive, but their intent was unmistakable. Captain Harrison informed Camilla that she was being escorted from the palace premises immediately. Her presence at the state dinner was no longer welcome. She would be taken to a private room to collect her belongings, and then she would be asked to leave the palace grounds. Camilla's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. She had not expected this outcome. Perhaps she thought her refusal would be overlooked, or that Catherine would back down to avoid a scene. But she had miscalculated badly. The new queen was proving to be far stronger and more decisive than Camilla had anticipated. As the guards gently but firmly took her by the arms, Camilla finally seemed to understand the gravity of her mistake. But understanding came too late to change what was happening. The guests in the ballroom parted like waves as the guards escorted Camilla toward the exit. Every step of that long walk was witnessed by hundreds of eyes. Cameras from the official palace photographers captured the moment for posterity. Foreign dignitaries would return to their home countries with stories of what they had seen. This was no longer just a personal conflict between two women. This had become a defining moment in British royal history, a demonstration of how the new queen would handle challenges to her authority. As they moved through the ballroom, Camilla tried to maintain some dignity despite her humiliation. She kept her head up, refusing to show the tears that threatened to fall. but her pride could not erase the reality of what was happening. She was being removed from a royal event like a common troublemaker, escorted out by guards in front of everyone who mattered in British society. The shame of it burned through her, making each step toward the exit feel like walking through fire. Behind them, the ballroom slowly began to come back to life. The shock was starting to wear off, replaced by urgent whispered conversations. People turned to their neighbors, discussing what they had just witnessed in hushed, excited tones. Some expressed approval of the Queen's decisive action, praising her strength and commitment to upholding tradition. Others worried about the implications of such a public confrontation. Would this create a lasting rift in the royal family? What would the newspapers say? How would the public react? Lady Margaret approached Queen Catherine once more, this time offering words of support and reassurance. The Queen had handled the situation perfectly, she said. By acting swiftly and decisively, Catherine had sent a clear message that she would not tolerate disrespect to the crown. It was a difficult decision, but it was the right one. The monarchy's strength lay in its ability to maintain its traditions and dignity. Catherine had shown she understood this fundamental truth, even when it meant making a painful choice. The guards led Camilla through the palace corridors, away from the glittering ballroom and the curious eyes of the guests. The marble hallways echoed with their footsteps, a stark contrast to the music and conversation they had left behind. Captain Harrison maintained his professional demeanor, but he felt some sympathy for the woman between them. She had made a terrible mistake, but she was clearly paying a heavy price for her pride. Still, orders were orders, and his duty to the crown came before any personal feelings. They reached a small antechamber where Camilla's coat and personal items had been brought. The guard stood by the door, giving her a moment of privacy to collect herself. Through the closed door, they could hear the muffled sounds of the party continuing without her. The orchestra had resumed playing. Laughter and conversation had returned. Life in the ballroom was moving forward as if nothing extraordinary had happened, but Camilla knew that nothing would ever be the same again. This night would follow her for the rest of her life. As Camilla gathered her things with trembling hands, she thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. Her refusal to curtsy had seemed so important, so justified in her mind. But now, facing the consequences of that decision, she wondered if her pride had cost her everything. Outside the antechamber, the palace continued its celebration of the new queen, and Camilla prepared to leave the only world she had ever known, removed from the royal circle by her own stubborn defiance. The palace gates closed behind Camilla with a sound that seemed to echo through the cold London night. She stood alone on the street, her elegant gown feeling ridiculous now in the harsh glare of the streetlights. A car had been arranged to take her home, but she could not bring herself to get in immediately. Instead, she stared up at the illuminated windows of Buckingham Palace, where the party continued without her. The music and laughter that drifted down from those windows felt like mockery now. Inside the ballroom, Queen Catherine stood before her guests with renewed confidence. The removal of Camilla had been difficult, but it had served its purpose. Every person in that room now understood that Catherine was a queen, who would defend her position and uphold the dignity of the crown. She raised her glass in a toast, her voice steady and warm as she welcomed everyone to the celebration. The guests responded with enthusiastic applause, their respect for the new monarch growing stronger with each passing moment. The news of the incident spread like wildfire through the palace staff. Servants whispered about it in the kitchens. Guards discussed it in their posts. Everyone had an opinion about what had happened and what it meant for the future. Some praised the Queen for her strength and decisiveness. They said it was about time someone stood up for proper protocol and respect. Others worried about the scandal that would surely follow. By morning, the whole nation would be talking about nothing else. In the palace's private media room, the royal communications team worked frantically to prepare a statement. They knew that within hours, reporters would be calling, demanding explanations and details. The story needed to be controlled carefully. Sir Edward Collins, the Queen's press secretary, drafted and redrafted the official statement, choosing each word with extreme care. The message needed to be clear. The Queen had acted appropriately in response to a serious breach of protocol, and the matter was now closed. Meanwhile, in her own home, Camilla finally allowed herself to break down. The weight of what had happened crashed over her like a wave. She had been publicly humiliated, escorted out of the palace like a criminal in front of everyone who mattered. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages, but she could not bring herself to answer them. What could she possibly say? How could she explain or justify what she had done? The pride that had seemed so important just hours ago now felt like the worst kind of foolishness. Back at the palace, the state dinner continued until well past midnight. Foreign dignitaries praised the elegance of the event and the grace of the new queen. Catherine moved through the rooms with practiced ease, engaging in conversation, laughing at jokes, and making each guest feel valued and important. No one watching her would have guessed the turmoil she felt inside. She had made a difficult decision tonight, one that might have lasting consequences. But she had made it for the right reasons, and she would stand by it. As the last guests finally departed, Catherine retired to her private chambers. Lady Margaret followed, wanting to ensure the Queen was truly all right after such an eventful evening. The two women sat together in the quiet comfort of the Queen's sitting room, reflecting on what had transpired. Margaret reminded Catherine that every great monarch had faced such tests, moments when they had to choose between personal feelings and duty to the crown. Catherine had passed her first major test with flying colors. The next morning came too quickly. Catherine woke to find her breakfast tray accompanied by every major newspaper in the country. The headlines were bold and dramatic, each one focusing on the previous night's confrontation. Some papers praised the Queen's decisive action, calling it a necessary defense of royal tradition. Others questioned whether the response had been too harsh, suggesting that the incident could have been handled more quietly. But all of them agreed on one thing. Queen Catherine had made a powerful statement about how she intended to rule. Television news programs devoted entire segments to analyzing the event. Royal experts were brought in to discuss the implications. Historians compared it to similar incidents from centuries past. Public opinion was divided, with some supporting the Queen's actions and others sympathizing with Camilla. Social media exploded with debates and discussions, with hashtags related to the incident trending worldwide. The story had captured the public imagination in a way that few royal events ever did. Camilla remained in seclusion, refusing all interview requests and public appearances. Her friends reported that she was devastated by what had happened and deeply regretted her decision not to curtsy. Some sources close to her suggested she had been planning to apologize to the Queen privately, hoping to repair the damage. But others claimed she still believed she had been in the right, and that the Queen's response had been excessive. The truth, as always, was probably somewhere in between. Within the palace walls, preparations continued for the Queen's upcoming schedule of official duties. Catherine had a busy month ahead, with visits planned to hospitals, schools, and various charitable organizations. She was determined to show that she was not just a queen who could enforce protocol, but one who truly cared about her people and their well-being. The incident with Camilla would eventually fade from the headlines, but the lesson it taught would remain important throughout her reign. Captain Harrison and Lieutenant Thompson returned to their regular duties, though they found themselves the subjects of much attention from their fellow guards. Everyone wanted to hear first-hand accounts of what had happened, how Camilla had reacted, what the Queen had said. The two men remained professional and discreet, sharing only the most basic facts. They had done their duty as ordered, and they took no pleasure in the controversy that had resulted. They were simply soldiers following protocol and protecting the dignity of the monarchy. As the days passed, life at the palace gradually returned to normal. The state dinner became a topic of legend, a story that would be told and retold for years to come. Queen Catherine had proven herself capable of making difficult decisions and standing by them. She had shown that she understood the weight of the crown and the responsibilities it carried, and though the cost had been high, paid in hurt feelings and broken relationships, she had established her authority in a way that would serve her well in all the challenges to come. 3 weeks after the incident, Queen Catherine received an unexpected letter. It arrived through official palace channels, written on expensive cream paper in careful handwriting. The return address showed it came from Camilla's residence. Catherine held the envelope for a long moment before opening it, uncertain what to expect. Would it be an angry accusation, a formal complaint, or perhaps something entirely different? She finally broke the wax seal and began to read. The letter was an apology. Camilla wrote that she had spent the past weeks in deep reflection about her actions that night. She admitted that her refusal to curtsy had been wrong, driven by pride and stubbornness rather than any legitimate grievance. She acknowledged that she had disrespected not just Catherine personally, but the office of the Queen and centuries of tradition. The words seemed genuine, filled with regret and a request for forgiveness, but Catherine knew that words on paper were easy. The real question was whether Camilla truly understood the damage she had caused. Catherine showed the letter to her closest advisors. Lady Margaret read it carefully, her experienced eyes searching for any hint of insincerity or manipulation. Sir Edward examined it from a public relations perspective, considering how any response might be perceived by the media. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who had been called in for his wisdom and guidance, offered his thoughts on forgiveness and reconciliation. Each advisor had a different opinion about how the Queen should proceed. Some argued that Catherine should maintain her distance, that accepting the apology too quickly might appear weak and undermine the authority she had established. They pointed out that Camilla had shown poor judgment, and there was no guarantee she would not cause problems again in the future. Others suggested that showing mercy and grace would demonstrate the Queen's strength in a different way, proving she could be both firm and compassionate. The decision, they all agreed, was ultimately Catherine's alone to make. Catherine spent a long evening considering her options. She walked through the palace gardens thinking about leadership, forgiveness, and the kind of queen she wanted to be. The incident had established her willingness to enforce protocol and defend the crown's dignity. That message had been received loud and clear, but now she faced a different test. Could she show mercy without appearing weak? Could she accept an apology without erasing the lesson that had been taught? These were the questions that kept her awake late into the night. Meanwhile, public interest in the story had not faded as quickly as palace officials had hoped. Tabloid newspapers continued to run speculative articles about the relationship between Catherine and Camilla. Television programs featured debates about royal protocol and whether traditions needed to be modernized. Opinion polls showed the nation remained divided, with roughly half supporting the Queen's actions and half believing she had been too severe. The incident had touched on deeper questions about respect, authority, and change in modern Britain. After much thought, Catherine decided to respond to the letter. She would not simply ignore it or dismiss Camilla's apology, but neither would she pretend that nothing serious had happened. She wrote her own letter, acknowledging Camilla's regret while making clear that actions had consequences. The incident could not be undone, and trust once broken took time to rebuild. However, she was willing to consider the possibility of a private meeting in the future, if Camilla was truly committed to respecting the protocols and traditions of the monarchy. When Camilla received the Queen's response, she felt a mixture of relief and humility. Catherine had not rejected her completely, but she had also not offered easy forgiveness. The path forward would require genuine effort and patience. Camilla understood that she would have to prove through her actions, not just her words, that she had learned from her mistake. It would be a long journey back to any kind of acceptance within royal circles, if such a return was even possible. As spring turned to summer, Catherine continued with her royal duties, growing more confident in her role with each passing week. She visited hospitals where she spoke with patients and medical staff. She attended charity events, lending her support to causes close to her heart. She met with political leaders, both domestic and foreign, showing herself to be intelligent and well-informed on matters of state. The incident with Camilla became one chapter in her story, but not the whole story. The palace staff noticed a change in the Queen during these months. She seemed to have found her voice and her strength as a leader. She made decisions more quickly and with greater confidence. She listened to advice but trusted her own judgment. The woman who had stood firm in the ballroom that night had discovered something important about herself. She had learned that being queen meant making difficult choices and living with the consequences. Whether popular or not, Camilla kept a low profile during this time, avoiding public events and declining most social invitations. She worked quietly with various charities, trying to do good work without seeking attention for it. Some saw this as genuine repentance. Others viewed it as strategic image rehabilitation. Regardless of the motivation, she was clearly trying to show through her actions that she had changed. Whether it would be enough to earn her way back into the royal family's good graces remained to be seen. The media eventually moved on to other stories, though the incident was occasionally referenced in articles about royal protocol or Queen Catherine's leadership style. Historians began to analyze it as a significant moment in the modern monarchy, a time when a new queen had to assert her authority in a very public way. Some compared it to challenges faced by queens throughout British history. Others saw it as uniquely relevant to contemporary discussions about respect and tradition in a changing world. 6 months after that fateful state dinner, Queen Catherine attended another major event at Buckingham Palace. As she greeted guests in the receiving line, she felt calm and assured. She had proven she could handle difficult situations with strength and grace. She had established herself as a queen who understood the balance between tradition and compassion. And though the memory of that night remained with her, it no longer caused anxiety or doubt. Instead, it served as a reminder of the kind of leader she had chosen to become. Nearly a year had passed since the incident that had shocked the nation. Queen Catherine sat in her private study, reviewing preparations for the upcoming anniversary celebration of her coronation. It would be a grand affair, marking her first full year as queen and showcasing the modernization and stability she had brought to the monarchy. As she looked over the guest list, one name caught her attention. Camilla had requested permission to attend, but the decision of whether to invite her fell to Catherine alone. Lady Margaret entered the study, carrying additional documents for the Queen's review. She noticed Catherine staring at Camilla's name and understood immediately what the Queen was considering. The two women had discussed this possibility several times over the past months. Camilla had maintained her respectful distance, had worked quietly on charitable projects, and had made no further public missteps. But was that enough? Did 1 year of good behavior erase the humiliation of that night in the ballroom? Catherine remembered the advice the Archbishop had given her months ago. He had spoken about the power of redemption and second chances, about how the strongest leaders were those who could show both justice and mercy. She thought about her own journey over the past year, how she had grown into her role as queen. She had made mistakes of her own. Though none as public as Camilla's, she had learned that leadership meant constantly balancing competing values and making choices that served the greater good. The Queen asked Lady Margaret for her honest opinion. Her advisor chose her words carefully. She explained that inviting Camilla could be seen as a sign of strength and confidence, showing that Catherine was secure enough in her position to extend grace to someone who had wronged her. However, it could also be perceived as weakness if not handled correctly. The key would be ensuring that Camilla understood the conditions of her attendance and the behavior that would be expected of her. There could be no room for another incident. Catherine made her decision. She would invite Camilla to the anniversary celebration, but there would be clear expectations. She drafted a personal letter explaining that this was an opportunity for a fresh start, but one that came with responsibilities. Camilla would be expected to show proper respect for protocol at all times. She would curtsy to the Queen as tradition demanded, and she would conduct herself with the dignity befitting someone attending a royal event. If she could accept these terms, she would be welcome to attend. The letter was delivered to Camilla's residence the following day. She read it 3 times, her hands trembling slightly as she absorbed its contents. This was more than she had dared to hope for. The Queen was offering her a chance at redemption, a possibility of returning to the world she had lost through her own foolish pride. But the letter also made clear that this was not forgiveness earned, but an opportunity given. What she did with that opportunity would determine everything that followed. Camilla spent days crafting her response. She wanted to express her gratitude without seeming presumptuous. She needed to acknowledge the seriousness of her past mistake, while showing her commitment to doing better. When she finally sent her reply, it was brief but heartfelt. She thanked the Queen for her graciousness, accepted all the conditions without reservation, and promised to honor the trust being placed in her. She would attend the celebration and show the proper respect that should have been given from the very beginning. News of Camilla's invitation spread quickly through palace circles. Some staff members were surprised by the Queen's decision. Others praised it as a masterstroke of royal diplomacy. The royal communications team prepared statements for the inevitable media questions. They would emphasize the Queen's belief in second chances and her commitment to healing divisions. They would stress that this was not about forgetting the past, but about moving forward with grace and dignity. As the anniversary celebration approached, preparations intensified. The ballroom where the original incident had occurred would once again host hundreds of guests. But this time the atmosphere would be different. Catherine had established her authority over the past year through consistent, thoughtful leadership. She no longer needed to prove herself through dramatic confrontations. Her strength was evident in her confidence and her ability to show mercy from a position of power rather than weakness. The night of the celebration arrived with clear skies and perfect weather. Guests began arriving early, eager to be part of this historic occasion. The press gathered outside the palace gates, cameras ready to capture every moment. Everyone knew that Camilla would be attending, and speculation ran wild about how the reunion would unfold. Would there be tension? Would there be drama? Or would both women show the grace and maturity that the occasion demanded? Inside the palace, Catherine prepared for the evening with calm deliberation. She wore a stunning sapphire gown that caught the light beautifully. Her crown sat perfectly on her head, a symbol of the authority she had defended so fiercely a year ago. But tonight was not about conflict or confrontation. Tonight was about celebrating her successful first year as queen and demonstrating the kind of leadership that combined strength with compassion. She was ready for whatever the evening might bring. Camilla arrived at the palace gates with her heart pounding. She had thought about this moment for months, rehearsing in her mind exactly what she would do and say. She understood that everyone would be watching her, judging her, waiting to see if she had truly learned from her mistake. The weight of that attention was almost overwhelming. But she also felt a sense of determination. She would not waste this second chance. She would show the queen and everyone else that she deserved the grace she had been given. As she stepped through the palace doors, Camilla took a deep breath. Ahead of her lay the long walk to the ballroom, the same path she had been escorted along in shame a year ago. But tonight would be different. Tonight she would approach Queen Catherine with humility and respect. Tonight she would do what she should have done from the very beginning. And perhaps, if she was fortunate, tonight would mark the beginning of her redemption and the healing of wounds that had seemed too deep to ever fully mend. The ballroom glowed with golden light as Camilla entered, her steps measured and careful. The room fell into an expectant hush, though not the shocked silence of a year ago. This time people watched with curiosity and hope rather than horror. She moved through the crowd, acknowledging familiar faces with small nods and gentle smiles. But her focus remained fixed on her destination. At the far end of the room, Queen Catherine stood in the receiving line, radiant in her sapphire gown, greeting guests with the warmth and confidence that had become her trademark. As Camilla drew closer, she felt her heart racing. This was the moment that would define whether she truly had a future in royal circles, or whether she would remain forever marked by her past mistake. She saw Catherine notice her approach. For a brief instant, their eyes met across the crowd. In that look, Camilla saw neither anger nor pity, but rather a calm acceptance. The queen was giving her the chance she had asked for, but the outcome depended entirely on what Camilla did next. Camilla reached the receiving line and stood before Queen Catherine. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Every eye in the room watched this encounter, knowing its significance. Camilla took one more deep breath, steadying herself. Then, with perfect form and genuine respect, she performed a deep, graceful curtsy. It was the gesture she should have made a year ago, the simple act of respect that would have prevented so much pain and controversy. But she was making it now, and that was what mattered. Catherine extended her hand, and Camilla took it gently. The queen spoke in a voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. She welcomed Camilla to the celebration and expressed her hope that this anniversary would mark not just her own year of service, but also new beginnings for everyone present. The words were carefully chosen, acknowledging the past while focusing on the future. It was a masterful display of diplomatic grace, giving Camilla the recognition she needed while maintaining the dignity of the crown. Camilla thanked the queen with sincere gratitude. She congratulated Catherine on a successful first year and praised the positive changes the queen had brought to the monarchy. Her words were genuine, reflecting months of observation and reflection. She had watched from a distance as Catherine had proven herself to be a strong, compassionate, and effective leader. The queen she had disrespected a year ago had grown into a monarch worthy of every bit of the respect Camilla now freely offered. After their brief exchange, Camilla moved on to allow other guests their moment with the queen. But something fundamental had shifted in that interaction. The tension that had hung over the palace for a year had finally begun to dissipate. People throughout the ballroom visibly relaxed. Conversations became warmer and more animated. The celebration felt more genuine, as if everyone had been waiting for this moment of reconciliation before they could truly enjoy the evening. Throughout the rest of the evening, Camilla conducted herself with impeccable dignity. She engaged in pleasant conversations with other guests, but never drew undue attention to herself. She was present but not prominent, respectful of the fact that this was Catherine's night to shine. Several times she saw the Queen across the room, and each time they exchanged small nods of acknowledgement. There was no dramatic reconciliation scene, no emotional embrace, but there was something perhaps more meaningful: mutual respect and the beginning of healing. Captain Harrison and Lieutenant Thompson, the guards who had escorted Camilla from the palace a year ago, stood at their posts observing the evening. They had been concerned about potential conflict, but those fears proved unfounded. The evening proceeded smoothly, with none of the drama that had marked the previous year's event. As professional military men, they were pleased to see protocol being properly observed and respect being shown to the Queen. It made their duty easier and more pleasant to perform. As midnight approached, Queen Catherine gave a speech to her assembled guests. She spoke about her first year as Queen, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned. She talked about the importance of tradition and protocol, but also about growth, forgiveness, and moving forward. She did not mention Camilla by name, but everyone in the room understood the subtext of her words. She was acknowledging the difficult journey of the past year while celebrating the hope and promise of the future. The guests responded to the speech with genuine applause. Foreign dignitaries praised the Queen's wisdom and maturity. Government officials expressed their confidence in her continued leadership. Even the most critical members of the press corps had to admit that Catherine had handled her first year with remarkable skill and grace. She had proven herself capable of being both strong and merciful, firm in her principles while remaining open to redemption and second chances. As the celebration wound down, Camilla prepared to depart. She approached the Queen one final time to express her thanks for the evening and for the opportunity to attend. Catherine responded warmly, noting that the true measure of character was not in never making mistakes, but in how one responded to those mistakes and grew from them. It was a generous statement, one that acknowledged Camilla's year of reflection and change without diminishing the seriousness of her original offense. Walking out of the palace that night, Camilla felt lighter than she had in months. The burden of shame and regret that had weighed on her for so long had not disappeared entirely, but it had lessened. She had been given a second chance, and she had not wasted it. She had shown respect where respect was due. She had conducted herself with dignity and grace. And perhaps most importantly, she had learned a lesson about humility and the consequences of pride that would stay with her for the rest of her life. In the days that followed, newspapers covered the anniversary celebration extensively. Most articles focused on the Queen's successful first year and the positive changes she had implemented. But many also mentioned the quiet reconciliation between Catherine and Camilla, praising both women for their maturity and grace. The story that had begun with such drama and conflict ended not with a grand gesture or emotional scene, but with simple respect, genuine growth, and the understanding that true leadership sometimes means knowing when to enforce consequences and when to offer second chances. Queen Catherine had proven herself capable of both, and in doing so had shown the kind of wisdom that would serve her well throughout her reign.